Hey everybody, I'm Severely Mame, and today this is another quick stitch. Quick stitch videos are where I show you something in the sewing realm that I've done in past videos but maybe didn't go into enough detail with. This week I'm going to be showing you how I install a zipper, this time into a skirt. I'm going to start here by measuring the zipper that I'm using. Because it's only going into a skirt, I'm using a 9-inch zipper. Now, that means I'm going to want about 8.5 inches of my side seam that I'm installing this into to be done with a basting stitch. So here, I'm lining up the ends of my fabric, and I'm going to measure out the 8.5 inches that I want for this piece. Now here I am measuring those 8.5 inches. I took off 1/2 inch because the total length of the zipper is 9 inches, but I don't need the excess ribbon at the bottom. So at 8.5, I am putting my first pin, and then I'm going to pin down the full rest of this side seam. This is a gathered skirt similar to the one I've done a video on in the past. I will put a card up to that here where you can follow along. There I did a terrible job installing a zipper, so I specifically wanted to come back and show you all how I do it again, but with better results. I have been sewing for 20 years and I have still not perfected zippers. I think a lot of people who work in the realm of sewing either get it and love doing zippers or hate it. Now I'm taking it over to the machine and I am going to stitch the side seam that is not included in the zipper. So here I'm doing a back stitch at 5/8 seam allowance and then sewing on with my normal seam length. Now on this machine I usually do between 8 and 12 stitches per inch. Some machines have different settings on how you decide what your stitch length is. Mine is how many stitches per inch. So here I'm doing probably about a 10. So I am stitching up this seam. Because I didn't use a pattern for the skirt, I just cut 2 panels. There is a little excess at the bottom, so I'm not going to go all the way. I'm going to backstitch at the end of the first fabric, and that will later be trimmed off. But the focus here is installing the zipper, so I'm going to trim my threads, get those out of the way, and I've taken out all of my other pins as I was sewing, but I'm leaving that one in so I know where my basting stitches are going to stop. But now that the bottom is secure, I'm going to reset my stitch length to be the longest running stitch I can do, which is 6 stitches per inch. And now I am going to pin the section that the zipper is going into before I baste it. Now sometimes I'm excessive in my use of pins. It wasn't maybe completely necessary to pin, 9 inches of fabric. But here I am just lining up the end of my fabric with the needle of my machine and just doing a running basting stitch at 5/8 seam allowance because that's the seam allowance I put into everything. I am a tried and true home sewer, and most sewing patterns that you buy will have a 5/8 seam allowance. Now I do not backstitch at the end because all of this stitch is going to be removed, but I do cut my excess seams a little bit longer here so that way it doesn't accidentally pull out before I'm done working with it. And you can see here there's no back stitching until you get to where the smaller stitches per inches. Now I am still working without an ironing board because I'm a glutton for punishment, but here I am just going to press open the seam, which is an essential in all sewing, but especially when you are sewing a zipper. You need a nice flat surface for your zipper to go onto. Here I am just ironing it. The entire fabric needs to be ironed, but I will do that. I'm also going to make a video on how I gather this, and before I do all the gathering, I will obviously get this all a nice iron. Because I've done this pattern before, I know what I'm doing. I should have ironed my fabric beforehand, but I didn't because I wanted to get this zipper tutorial done quickly for you guys. So there's my seam pressed nice and flat. So now that I have that ready, I'm going to take my zipper and open it up. I'm going to line up the end of my zipper with the end of my fabric, which this is the where the waist is going to be. And I'm matching where the teeth end to the inside of the seam that I just made. So I'm going to pin that along. Doing this on a hard surface instead of floating in the air is a much better idea, but I figured this was going to be the easiest way for me to show you guys exactly what I'm doing. So you want to line up the teeth of the zipper with that seam line and pin it in place. I do this 1/2 at a time. I think that you can visually get things lined up better when you open up the zipper to do it. In the past, in my youth of sewing, when I really didn't know what I was doing, I would just kind of try and center it and pin it down all at once, and you don't get as good of results there. So I have now lined up one side of my zipper, trying to not pin through my skirt because, again, you should be doing this on a hard surface. And now I'm going to close up my zipper. So, first I'm just pinning this bottom piece down, and now I'm going to close up my zipper and pin the opposite side. Now, in theory, if you've lined up your teeth with the center of that seam and pinned it correctly, it should flatten out to be in the same spot on both sides. So now I can just pin up the other way. Here I am actually just jumping right into sewing because it's held in place correctly. I'm using a different color thread here so you can see what I'm doing. Now, mind you, I'm sewing backwards right now. I thought that it was gonna visually be better, but I'm realizing it really didn't matter. So excuse my struggle. I am doing a long basting stitch by hand on the far edge of the zipper. And I'm going to go and do this all the way around the entire thing. Now, if you were sewing something different like a dress or like side zip, you still are going to use the same method. Though, like in a side of a dress, the top won't be open. You'll be lining things up a little bit more, but you'll still want to hand baste zippers in like this. I have lazily tried to avoid this in the past, and I realized taking the 4 or 5 minutes to do this does result in a much better zipper. So here I'm using a hot pink thread. You can use whatever color you like because it does not matter. It is going to be taken out later. I wanted to use the hot pink so you could see it, but also I will just use sometimes whatever thread is in a needle in my pin cushion because it is being removed. It does not matter what color. So here when I get to the bottom, I'm going to want to have one stitch in the bottom of each ribbon. Ooh, got caught on my pin cushion. I need to get a new wrist pin cushion. This one is very old. But here I'm going to work across, putting one stitch into each side of this ribbon, making sure that it is nicely in place, because this is what's going to be holding it down instead of pins, because pins can kind of get in the way when you are sewing on a zipper and kind of move it out of place, and this will have it be held right where it needs to be with no effect on how the actual garment will look or anything, because these, as I said, are just completely removed. I am struggling with figuring out how to video making things. I haven't figured out angles and how to get things to focus, because I film all these videos on my own, so excuse when it kind of is not completely in focus. This white zipper I didn't realize was such a bad choice. I wanted you to be able to see what I was doing, so I used a little bit of a different color. instead of a brown one, I used a white one. But here I am just putting in this last basting stitch. I'm not going to tie off the end or anything. When I clip this thread, I'm just going to leave it with a little extra length, and you can take out any pins, and that is your basting stitch. Your zipper should be held in, and now that that's done, you can take it over to your machine. Here's a little bit of a close-up of what it looks like from the outside right now. As you can see, those stitches are pretty even to the center seam, which is a good thing. Now, my machine is a 1962 Singer. I have a zipper foot that I'm very lucky. Kylie at Spidora Vintage, she found me this one because she collects all kinds of vintage machines and knew exactly what I needed when I didn't. So I've put on my zipper foot, which without a zipper foot, zippers are extremely hard. It can be done, but I highly suggest investing in one if you can get one for your machine. Spend the money on it. You will thank yourself in the future for it. But here I am making sure to adjust my stitch length back to my regular running stitch from a basting stitch. And I'm going to start this off with a back stitch holding the top in place. Now here I've refocused so you can see a little bit better of what I'm doing. So I'm running that back stitch, the zipper is closed, and I am lining up the edge of my zipper foot with the edge of my seam. Now, because I was trying to look at both the camera and my piece through the camera, I don't stay on this line perfectly, but that is the best width that I've figured out for my zippers. Now here I'm going to keep the needle down and just rotate my fabric to do the bottom of this zipper. Now I'm going to stitch forward, and then I'm going to stitch back because this is where the bottom of the zipper is going to hit. I want it to be a little sturdy, so I backstitched over it, all staying in line, running in the same channel, so it's not noticeable, but just has a little bit of extra thread there holding it together. I'm going to keep the needle down and rotate it again. Because I ripped this fabric, there is excess thread that keeps getting in my way. Make sure to clean that up, be better than me. But here I am going to put my zipper foot down and line it up with the edge of the seam allowance and stitch up my zipper. Now I like to try and flatten and have a nice taut grip on this while I'm doing it. It gives me much better results instead of trying to feed it like I normally would when I'm doing any normal seam. But I'm coming towards the end, and then I'm going to backstitch just so it's nicely in place, and then I can take it off, and I have sewn in my zipper. Trim your threads nice and short. Make sure to get rid of any excess. I always try and do this as I go along because when I was a kid learning how to sew, I didn't, and then I'd have a bunch of threads to try and fish out later. It made zero sense. So there you can see the zipper is sewn in. Here you can see that the basting stitch is far away from it, so you can just go and snip these. I usually go just like every other stitch and cut it because it makes it easy to pull out. So I'm going to cut all of these, if I can figure it out. There we go. Cut all of these, pull these threads out. There we go. Here I've realized that my nails are usually a big help for this. I like to keep my nails long because they are extra sewing tools if I'm lucky. So down here, it was a little too tight. I had to use my little scissors to get it. Like I said, I'm trying to figure out framing for these videos still. I will figure it out one of these days. So there's the zipper. I've got some more threads to trim here, get them nice and close to the seam, and get rid of those because you don't need them. And now I'm going to take out the basting stitches that I initially had put in. You can use a seam ripper for this or little thread scissors, whatever works best for you. I should have probably used a seam ripper because it would have been cleaner looking on here. But I'm just going to run my thread cutters down this seam, cutting out the basting stitch that I sewed in before because it's no longer needed. Now, I'm a little tight to the zipper on this one. This kind of is a personal preference / I told you I was staring at my machine through my camera, which does not, produce very efficient sewing. But I'm just going to cut this all open and get this zipper ready to use. Once you've done this, you are finished. When you're cutting this out, go nice and slow, because if you're using a seam ripper, sometimes you can accidentally cut your fabric, which you don't want to do, because then it will fray and over time take away from its durability and the life that it has in your closet. So here we are. I have got a finished zipper for you. Look at that. Make sure to remove any excess threads that you just cut. But all in all, that was my way of sewing a zipper. Now make sure to hit that like button below, subscribe to my channel, and if you really like what's going on here, make sure to follow the link below to my Patreon, where you can help me make videos like this.